from teaching. I was an educator for many, many years. I taught third grade, fourth grade, sixth grade, was a literacy coach and specialist. I was an adjunct instructor at Bloomsburg University, Bucknell University, and the University of Buffalo. From teaching, I was an Whoop.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. And I also worked with authors and educational publishing companies to develop resources for their books before joining NLP in 2021. So a little bit about NLP. Our mission is to advance the development and teaching of news literacy in K-12 education. And our vision is that all students in the United States are skilled in news literacy before they graduate from high school, preparing them to think critically and independently as active participants in society. In the next 30 minutes, we're going to do three things. First, we're going to define news literacy and develop an understanding of the field's core competencies. Second, we're going to discuss why news literacy is important in K-12. And finally, we're going to explore how the concept of misinformation can develop from K-12 or any concept. A little housekeeping. So, oh, I was off on my slide. Okay, so those are the three things we're going to do. A little housekeeping is if you could join Slido, either using that QR code or going to slido.com and 1802-695. And what this is going to do is allow you to add questions to Slido, to this app, so that when we get to the question part, I can review your questions and answer them. So at any time you have questions throughout the presentation, just go ahead and add to this Slido app. And I'll show you, right? It should pop up with this Q&A. That's where you just write the question. But also throughout the presentation, I'm going to have some polls. And then finally, if you click on those three dots, you're going to see a spot for a resource document. If you want to click that, I will ask for a little bit of information from you. And the reason we ask is so we have to just keep track of numbers so that donors and grants, we have to prove that we are actually working with educators and make a difference. We don't share that information. We don't sell it. But that's so that if you'll give us a little bit of information, then you hit submit and you can get a link to the resource doc for today. And it'll look something like that, right, on the bottom, selected resources for K-12. And if for some reason you couldn't access that resource doc through Slido, here's a direct QR code to that resource doc. Does anyone need more time? If so, I guess fill it out in the chat. Let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. Okay. Getting to know you. If you will, take a minute, and I can see your names, but if you want to tell me your role and an emoji that matches how you feel about teaching news literacy. Do you love it? Are you a little afraid? Are you on fire? Like everything, this is crazy, or like, oh, I know I need to teach it, but I really don't want to. Or some other emoji. Yay! We've got a happy one. I could have guessed that. All right. Let's keep going. So let's first talk about what is news literacy. And if you hear the term, you might think about obviously news, you might think about misinformation, you might think about quality journalism, you might think about social media and influencers. A lot of things might come to your mind. But since we are here with the Media Education Lab, we should say, right, and start with a basic definition, which is news literacy at its core is the ability to determine the credibility of news and other information. It's a discipline within media literacy focused on specific non-ideological principles and teaching. It is an approach that teaches you how to think about news and information you encounter daily, not what to think. It is nonpartisan. It helps students recognize the characteristics of credible information and how to use these attributes to make personal decisions about what to trust. So what we want to do at NLP is we want to help students develop a mindset of curiosity and healthy skepticism. And And at NLP, we discuss 5 core competencies that students need to be skilled in news literacy. So let's take a look at those 5 core competencies. The first is about information type. It seeks to help students tell the difference between news and other kinds of information, such as opinion, how to spot ads and sponsored content. The second is about focusing on an understanding of why the First Amendment matters and how a free press both helps keep the public informed and acts as a watchdog on behalf of the public's interest. The third standard focuses on credibility, standards and ethical practices that define quality journalism, and how to recognize these in any type of situation, whether it's a blog post or a media post or from a standards-based news organization. The fourth standard is focus on verification, analysis, and evaluation. This is what people think about when they think about fact-checking and skills of identifying misinformation. And then standard 5 is about civic participation. You have all of this knowledge and these skills and mindsets. Now, what are you going to do with it? So standard 5 focuses on civic participation, helping young people put all these skills into practice as active, responsible community members who know how to find, share, and create credible information. So what is news literacy? At its core, the ability to detect and determine credibility of news and other information. Now, why do we need to teach news literacy? If you are here, you probably already have an idea, but we're going to do a little bit of fun. So you're going to get that phone out again, get ready for Slido, because I'm going to ask you to join Slido and click on that QR code, slido.com, or the number 1802-695. It's the same. If you have Slido open already, it should pop up as a poll question. And I'd like you to answer this one. This article is best categorized as which type of information? Advertisement, news, entertainment, or opinion? What do you think your students would choose? This article, what do you think your students would say this is? Advertisement, news, entertainment, or opinion? All right. And 50% said news, 50% said entertainment, but the answer is actually opinion. And I'll tell you why, right? So we asked students, this article is best categorized as which type of information. This was one of our questions in our survey from the News Literacy in America 2024 survey we completed with over 1,000 teens. And this was one of the questions we asked. So the article is an op-ed, right, published in the Sun Chronicle based in Attleboro, Massachusetts.
It says commentary.
So the word commentary in the article, right, is going to be your clue. So words like commentary, opinion, op-ed, editorial are going to be used by news organizations to indicate that a piece is opinion rather than a news report. And despite this label in the headline, only about half of the teens accurately identified this article as opinion, right? So there's one reason. Standard 1, can they differentiate news from other types of information? Let's go to standard 2. This is another question we asked, and I'd like you to answer as well. What are the 5 freedoms protected by the First Amendment? There's 5, and you may have to scroll down on your phone to see it, and then of course hit submit. How would your students answer this question? How do you think they would answer? Okay. And we've got, 100%. Your students are so smart. 5 freedoms, of course, are the freedom of the press, freedom to assemble, freedom of speech, freedom to petition, and freedom of religion. We asked the teens that same question, and about 2/3 failed to identify all 5 freedoms protected by the First Amendment. So we've got an issue there. And it's not just our research. The Annenberg Public Policy Center's nationally representative survey, they asked about 1,600 US adults, and they found that the level of the public knowledge had not really changed since the year before. Most Americans could only name a single right guaranteed by the First Amendment, which is freedom of speech, provided by nearly 3 in 4 respondents. Interestingly, the right to bear arms, respondents said more than the right to petition. 22% said that, and that, of course, is the Second Amendment. So we've got some issues about knowing what our rights are and the role of a free press in a democracy. Next question about Standard 3. How often, if ever, do you think professional journalists and the news organizations they work for confirm facts before reporting them? How do you think your students would answer this? Go through your phone. And there are no right or wrong answers, of course, on this one. Or actually, my bad. Not on this one. There are. There's a definite right answer here. So how did our teens respond? Most teens, it's almost an inverse response. So most teens do not believe that standards-based journalism practices are the norm these days. The question I just had you answer was this one: confirm facts before reporting them, and perceptions of frequency of journalist actions. So percentage of teens who say that professional journalists and news organizations almost always or often confirm facts before reporting them, only 30. Is that 38 or is that 30? I can't read it. 30%. Really, really quite low. And this poll was taken from Bias, Boring, and Bad, which was a follow-up to our original 2024 survey. We reconnected with over 750 of the original respondents, and we looked at their perceptions of news media and journalism to better understand the nature of their distrust in news media, including understanding how newsrooms work. And I was going to address this. Yes, it does depend on what we mean by professional news organizations. And there's a pretty big misunderstanding of what constitutes a professional journalist. All right, so what do standards-based news organizations do? They correct errors when they happen. They gather information from multiple sources. They confirm facts before reporting them. And they cover stories that help protect the public's interest. So these are what a professional journalist would do. You can notice less than half of our teens believe that that's what a professional journalist does. Yes, these are the ideals of journalism, absolutely. On the other hand, unethical behaviors is what our students are believing journalists are doing. So give advertisers special treatment. Almost half of our teens said that that's what they would do. Make up details such as quotes, pay or do favors for sources, take photos and videos out of context. These are huge no-nos for a professional standards-based news organizations. If a professional journalist would do this, they would potentially lose their job. It would be called out. This would not happen in an ethical standards-based news organization. And here I'm just zooming in a little bit so you can see a little bit closer. Yeah.
So it definitely makes, so I'm putting this in the questions. You gave us a place to do that, right, Pamela?
I did. In the Slido, yep, in the Slido app, just go to that question Q&A tab. Next Slido. Does this social media post provide strong evidence that hot temperatures in Texas melted traffic lights in July 2023? Yes, no, or I don't know. How would your students answer this? Okay, half and half. So some of you think that it would provide strong evidence. Your students would say it does, and half would say it wouldn't. The correct answer is no, it does not provide strong evidence. There is nothing to suggest that it's the heat in Texas, which is why the traffic lights are melting. That is not strong evidence. Roughly 1 in 3 teens, though, say a social So here's roughly 1 in 3 teens say a social media post spreading misinformation provides strong evidence for its claim. About a third of our students said yes. In reality, the photo in this post, it's from the aftermath of a scooter fire in Italy that happened in July 2022. It has nothing to do with the extreme weather in Texas. So this goes with our standard 4 skills of verification, analysis, and evaluation. And again, it's not just our research. A Stanford History Education Group study, now the Digital Inquiry Group, of the 2018-2019 school year found that more than 3,400 high school students, 96% didn't consider why ties between a climate change website and the fossil fuel industry might lessen the site's credibility, meaning they couldn't assess the credibility. More than half believed that a grainy video of ballot stuffing that was actually shot in Russia was quote unquote strong evidence of voter fraud in the US, meaning they couldn't evaluate evidence. And almost 70% couldn't tell the difference between news and sponsored content advertising on a news site's homepage. So they couldn't identify advertisements. This brings us to the big answer, which you probably already knew. Why do we need to teach news literacy? Because our kids might be digital natives, but they need that explicit instruction in news literacy. They're not automatically savvy. Our kids know this too. The overwhelming majority of teens say they support media literacy requirements for schools. And if you want to take a look at the full report, it is linked in that resource doc. So our students want media literacy education, but most aren't getting it. If you notice in this chart, have any of your classes at school this year included any media literacy instruction? 39% yes, 35% no, and 26% weren't sure if they had received any instruction. What's even more telling here is that from the survey, a little bit background, the question was for any student who said they got any media literacy at all, even one activity or discussion counts. So if we take that into consideration, right, this is a very, very small portion who are getting this training. So now what happens when we teach news literacy intentionally? I think you'll be excited to see this part. I was, but I'm a data person. All right, so when we have pre and post assessments aligned with our lessons on Checkology, which is also linked on your resource doc, we saw some great growth. After one intervention, meaning the students took this one lesson on press freedoms and role of a watchdog, the press's role of a watchdog, the press's being a watchdog role for the public. So standard 2. On the pre-assessment, 29.1% of our students picked these 3: news organization exposing corruption in a local police department, a reporter at a city council meeting noticing unusual things in the city budget and investigating, and a reporter filing a public records request for health inspection records on the conditions of school cafeterias. Those are 3 examples of the press playing a watchdog role. After taking the lesson, 59.3% got that right. So a jump of 30.2 points or 103.8%. Growth after only one intervention. This is another pre-post question. So we have 2 articles about Coca-Cola announcing reusable packaging. Note the source. One of them is going to be from the company itself, likely intended to present the company in the best possible light. The other is from Reuters, not affiliated with the Coca-Cola company and likely doesn't have that same motivation. And here we can see the story explores criticism of the company's plan. We asked students this question in both our survey and in our pre-post, and we found nearly half the teens say a company's press release is more credible than an independent news report about the same subject. So they're not thinking about independence as a marker of credibility, but they need to. When we teach this in our evaluating evidence and credibility, right, and sources in our lessons on Checkology, we have found additional gains. These are just the results from the past 2 years. So from 24 to 25, 82% identified the more credible of 2 articles on the same topic from 2 different sources, a gain of 23 percentage points from our pre-assessment. When we explicitly teach it, they do learn. Here's that traffic light question again, which is also in our pre-post assessment. At the beginning, before taking the Checkology lesson, 67.6% got it right. But after, we jumped all the way to 87.8%. So a jump of 20.2% or 20.2 points. Had the highest post-survey accuracy of any metrics for standard 4, and moreover for any of our 15 metrics that we were assessing, which is really a good indicator and hope for the future. If we can get students thinking about what am I looking at, is there real evidence to suggest that this is true, will help us getting and navigating our information environment. Okay, so how do we develop news literacy concepts from K through 12? Again, let's revisit those 5 core standards. Information type, free press, credibility, verification, analysis, and evaluation, and civic participation. Everything we do is going to revolve around one of those 5 core or several of those 5 core standards. And we have 2 overarching documents that are going to help teachers and districts develop news literacy in their classrooms and districts. So the first one is our framework for teaching news literacy. Again, it's linked on your resource document. And then the other one is the grade band expectations. The framework is really great for individual teachers thinking about a unit plan or how I can, what are the big questions about news literacy. We develop it with understanding by design principles. So start with the end in mind and, plan your lessons accordingly. And then our grade band expectations are those specifics. And I worked with others on this grade band expectations doc, mainly because in a previous role as a literacy coach, I worked with an 8th grade teacher who was asking me, what do I teach? And this was for ELA, and he didn't have a curriculum, and he just had a textbook, and it was so overwhelming. And it reminded me when we talk about news literacy, there's so much. What do I have to teach? What are the core concepts? What is a secondary? So what we did is in this grade band expectations, we highlighted target indicators as the most essential and recommend one method of growing that news literacy skill from K through 12. And I see something in the chat. Oh, yes, I do not know. It is a great answer if we're trying to get kids to increase intellectual humility. That's a great point. Okay, so to demonstrate how we might grow one concept, I'm going to pick standard 4B, detecting and analyzing misinformation and its effect. How would we do that in K through 12? So from K through 2, here's your learning indicator. It says, in age-appropriate ways, recognize rumors and misinformation and how they can cause harm. So it might just be a class discussion. Has anyone ever said something about you that wasn't true? How did it make you feel? Why might someone share information that isn't true? How can that hurt people? Can something, for instance, still cause harm, even if it's meant to be funny? These are some core underlying principles and concepts that students need to understand when they get to the part about misinformation and motivations of people who spread misinformation and the effects of misinformation. And then there's also on the document implementation ideas for all of the learning indicators. And of course, these are just a start. You can take or leave as you will, and we would expect you, to have your own that you might find work better for your class. And then in 3 through 5, we have a target indicator, which is define misinformation, explore some of the reasons people create and share it. And here is a little preview from an upcoming resource we have in development. The definition of information that is misleading, erroneous, or false. And what we have here is spotting tricks, falsehoods, and fakes about natural disasters. Some of you savvy educators out there are probably already going to figure out where this is going. In this activity, we will build towers out of blocks to represent accurate information about natural disasters and towers out of cards to represent misinformation about natural disasters. So this would easily tie into any science or ELA lesson about natural disasters. And accurate information, of course, is going to give you a stronger foundation. And if you build a house out of cards, it will be much easier to collapse. So you're helping students see a base made out of misinformation is not as sturdy. Again, that's just a preview. It's not the whole lesson. We get to grade 6 through 8, another target indicator where we want students to recognize, differentiate different types of misinformation like satire, false context, imposter content, fabricated content, and manipulated content. This is a great poster. And if you zoom in, those are some of the 5 types of misinformation that we talk about in our misinformation lesson. And I'm going to give you just a quick preview of that lesson, about 1.5 minutes, to show you what a Checkology lesson might look like.
Manipulated content is a type of misinformation in which something is altered from the original, such as images that have had content added or removed using photo editing tools. And it's everywhere, like that picture of the shark that was added to a photo of a flooded highway I showed you earlier, or these celebrities who've had the messages on their shirts changed, or these so-called amazing nature photos shared on engagement bait accounts. Today, even videos can be manipulated, like this one, which was created using special effects.
And that lesson was led by Claire Wardle, Dr. Claire Wardle, who at the time was with First Draft and where we got our taxonomy from. Also in Checkology, students will be given the opportunity to do different assessments like this one, where they can click. The problem with quotes found on the internet is that they are often not true. So we're going to drag and drop that as satire. And here, this is what happens when a government believes people are illegal. That is going to be, false. I think there was false context. As temperature cools this fall, it's important to remember that climate change will be back next summer. It's not actually from CNN, so that's going to be imposter content. This is a composite of 2 photos, so that's manipulated content. And here is a CGI video, completely made up. And that is fabricated content. So you click next and yay, we got them all right. All right. We also ask students to reflect, right? So here are 4 examples of manipulated content. What do they all have in common? And students have to recognize, right, that anything that can be used as a blank canvas is easy to change the words. And same thing here. What do these images all have in common? Amazing nature photos. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. So somebody edited, right, a real photo or merged 2. When we get to 9 through 12, we get to much more higher level or advanced learning, so extended expectations. A learning indicator at this level might be evaluate the opportunities and challenges presented by artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT and image generators. Outline the ways such tools could be used to help reduce the spread of misinformation and how bad actors might use these tools to create and reinforce false claims and narratives. If you think about that very first K-2 expectation, do you see how it bridges and is the underlying foundation for what we are expecting at the end? So all of our grades have a role to play and can play a role. And I know we're getting close on time, so just here are a few more learning indicators you might do for 9 through 12. And resources we have, one of my favorite is Rumor Guard, which every week we go over 2 to 3 rumors that are circulating, and we go through why might people fall for them and why, how we can tell that they are false. It is now time for the discussion questions. So our 3, if you couldn't already guess what they were going to be: what is news literacy? Why is news literacy important in K through 12? And how can we teach news literacy from K through 12? Renee, do you do the breakout rooms, or am I supposed to?
I think given that we are a small group, we should stay in one large group, which is still pretty small. There's just a few of us, so no need to break out. Okay. Welcome, Darren. How are you? My favorite English teacher of all time. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And anyone else like to turn on their camera if you want to join the discussion, or if not, you can just open up your microphone and start to share. Which one should we start with?
Well, these are all issues in my life right now. So wherever you want to start.
Hey, so why is it important where you are, Darren? Introduce yourself a little, where your context is. Why is it what's going on in your part of the K-12 universe?
I'm Darren Johnson, and I I'm a newspaper advisor. I teach at Ames High School, and first semester I had sections of AP Language and Comp and sections of Intro to Journalism. And second semester I'm teaching multimedia composition. And I was just using um, daily do now activities with my students after school in the journalism club. But I guess the one of the issues I'm struggling with that's only somewhat related to this is that I have a lot of students in my multimedia composition and intro to journalism sections, but I don't have, I don't know if we'll be able to offer the school newspaper next year. And so, like, only a few students are doing that. So, I see why this is vital all the time. And I'm trying to incorporate more and more of this into my curriculum, but that's where I am right now.
Wow. Wow. And why do you think that is? What's going on that those enrollments are the way they are?
Really not sure. I'm not feeling super popular. Um, Part of it is that they need a composition credit, and so they can get a composition credit through Intro to Journalism and Multimedia Composition. And I think those are great ways to get composition credits in English. Um, it's harder for me now. We're offering a lot of concurrent courses now, and so some of the students that I would have seen in the past who are really maybe interested in reporting and taking photos and doing things like that aren't as interested. And so I'm struggling with that, I
Hmm.
guess. And I'm kind of seeing that too. Um, I know, Renee, you've talked about like moving students to be beyond elegant consumption. I'm seeing a lot of consumption, but a real need but at the for like news literacy, but at the same time, when I've posed some of these questions to my students, I am like really, I don't know, hopeful because I mean, they point out things that I sometimes miss, and they're much more savvy about social media and those aspects, but it does scare me about just what I'm doing right now in terms of we have some proposed legislation where students would be penalized if they staged any walkouts. And so our state teachers union has been talking about um, even a discussion about the First Amendment might be construed as encouraging students to, you know, walk out of school. And so it's just wild. I'm thinking, gosh, not only I feel like the flame is on both ends that we need to be teaching young people about news and literacy and news. But at the opposite end, I'm thinking I think the state legislature needs all these principles as well.
Darren, what state are you in again?
I'm in Iowa.
Okay. Yeah.
At the very best high school in the whole state, let's be honest, right?
It's a
Okay.
great
I
place.
mean, we could basically say that. Pamela, I'm curious about your reaction to this because it is interesting to think about how journalism class where you do scholastic journalism or school newspaper, that's a little different from news literacy, right? How do you conceptualize some of those differences?
Well, it is and it isn't because at the very heart of NLP, when we think about how we are teaching news literacy, it's a form of disciplinary literacy. And if you have heard of think like a historian, think like a mathematician, think like a scientist, at NLP we say think like a journalist. So learning and understanding how newsrooms operate and how journalists do their jobs, and how would a journalist react to this piece of information? Would they source it, in fact checking? All of that. Are they verifying their information? The ethical standards, if we understand what a journalist would look for, right? So obviously the verification. The mnemonic we created this year was vampires always investigate their friends' appetites. So V is I know. Verification, accuracy, always investigate, independence. T, transparency. Their F, fairness, friends. Wait, vampires always investigate their friends' appetites. Accountability. So if we teach these core concepts, right, of what a journalist, an ethical journalist would be doing, you would do that in a student newsroom, but then you would take that learning and apply it to what you are looking at and what your friends are sharing with you.
Hmm. 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 Cool. There's a question from Claude in the chat. How are your students talking about the role of news in their lives? Is information fatigue a thing for them? Whoa.
Those are good questions. I think they're for you, Darren.
The role of news in their lives. Yeah, it's interesting. Um, hmm. I don't know. I feel like a dinosaur sometimes because, talking about legitimate news sources or traditional news sources, I should say. And we have a subscription to the New York Times. And so I'm constantly making reference to that, having my students look at that. Um, but some of the survey information I've seen from here, just talking about, the number of teens who get information from or get news from TikTok is just pretty startling, I guess. But at the same time, sometimes they seem well prepared to discuss different issues. Um,
Right.
Information fatigue. Um, I think in general it is, and I guess we've really been concerned about cell phone usage and things like that in our classrooms, and so cell phones are banned, but they're still everywhere. And so I feel like there's information overload, but they don't have students in general don't always have the best, I don't know how to describe it, but educational Velcro or basic literacy to tack on to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. I think the issue of information fatigue is interesting for teachers. It's interesting for citizens, and it's interesting to think about with students. Me, I'm struggling with the I can lead a horse to water, but can I make them drink? And so I'm just going to build on something you said, Darren, which is I use the New York Times religiously. We have a school account, and each week we read and discuss a piece in the Times. But then when it comes time for my students to do their own work, their sources are just wacko. And it's partly why I struggle with the sort of professional organizations do it this way approach that, it would be nice if that were true. But it's sort of like the reality is that the things that they understand as news are not journalism at all. And so then what do we do? So I feel like I struggle with the changing role of the other kind of, I think in my book I call it news adjacent content, right? It looks like news, but it's not journalism, right? What to do with that?
So we have a new poster that just came out last month. It's meant to hang in the classroom. It's too big for an 8.5 by 11, but it's exactly what you're talking about, the information ecosystem that depends on news, right? So we think about it. How do I make this fit so we can see it?
Ooh. It looks adorable. It's okay. That was working.
Okay, so Yeah, I closed my PowerPoint, so if we have to finish, I'll have to open it up again. But right, so journalism is the news tree, and right? And so we have, if we talk about the 5 types of information, there's raw information, news, opinion, and all that, right? So raw information feeds the roots of the news tree, but they also, raw information you can see on anyone's social media feed who has a video and is recording an event. So the public gets it, news influencers get it, and all of these different roles in our media empire rely on news. And this is one of the things I keep thinking about in terms of standard 2, the importance of news in a democracy. And if we lose news, what do we lose, right? All of these jobs, all of these things will go away. When journalism disappears, the ecosystem suffers, right? So you've got raw information, the news tree, but content about news, all your influencers, well, not all your influencers, but the influencers who talk about news, all your commentators gone, right? And the public, are they going to be informed? How are they going to learn about anything? And when we talk about all these newspapers, both in the public and in the real world, and our student newspapers disappearing, right? And just what fills the void? And I know I've heard from people about how, oh, I can just get the news for free on Facebook or whatnot. Well, it's a spectrum. Sure, there are some sources that are credible, just like there are some influencers that are credible and independent reporters, but you have to be able to tell what you can trust. So there goes that disciplinary literacy again of what would an ethical standards-based reporter or journalist do and know.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you for sharing that. First of all, I love that poster, and I'm going to just call out Claude's great comment there, noting that many educators have a positive bias toward news consumption. Like it's preaching to the choir for us. But the current landscape, he says, seems to diminish news artifacts. So that's the sort of disconnect. But I think in a way that disconnect may motivate educators to find ways to integrate news literacy into the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So is there other ways we want to tackle these questions? Or actually, I'd love to have you talk. I'd love to have you answer my questions that were in the Slido, Pamela.
Yes, I have to bring up Slido again in order to get it on my. Here we go. So we'll go there and then I can go back. Does news literacy include learning about the business models of journalism and the role of social media platforms in diminishing local journalism? It's almost like you knew I was going to talk about that. Yes, it absolutely does. Think about the news adjacent, the news literacy ecosystem poster that we just talked about. Also, if you look at that grade band expectations, business models of journalism is one of our higher level learning indicators where we talk about it is still a business, but there should be a separation between the business side and the editorial side. But you still need to make money, so they do need advertisers, right? We need to find a way to pay journalists to do their jobs, just like we need to pay teachers to do their jobs. So it's a profession. Same thing with social media. And they have, actually, one thing I didn't talk about is the different goals, right? So a lot of times social media platforms, their goal is financial, it's incentive. They want you to click, and they are prioritizing content that will make you angry, surprised, in awe, so prioritizing things that will get clicks and shares over credible information, whereas a standards-based journalism news organization, they're going to prioritize credibility and informing the public. So one of the things we want to teach our students then, of course, is that we are, when we want to be informed, we want to go to the people who are there trying to inform us rather than to make money off of our attention, which is the attention economy, which we deal with in, algorithms, introduction to algorithms lesson, and I'm sure in some of your classes as well when we talk about algorithms and AI. All right. Next question. If trust is so low, I wonder what is the expectation for this is. Also, does news literacy education increase people's trust in news? Oh, this is something I think about a lot. Trust in most, if not all, organizations is like at an all-time low. So it's not just related to news literacy and journalists. Trust in news is low. I don't know all the reasons for why that is. There've been attacks on news, right, from leaders and people we would expect to inform us. So when we have mixed messaging, right, we also have a role of AI and misinformation diluting the information ecosystem. So people are now starting to wonder what they can trust. Again, the goal of news literacy is to develop healthy skepticism, not nihilism. But if we get too many bad actors, some people will just throw up their arms and say, oh, I can't believe anything. So why should I bother going to this news organization? I'll just read what I want to read, the ones that reinforce my own worldviews and confirm my biases, right? So there's that. I know there are other reasons. They're just not coming to me at the moment. Does news literacy education increase people's trust in news? And Kim would know the answer to this at NLP. I should know the answer, but I don't at the moment. And it's a really good question. I know that we are studying it. I don't know if there has been a definitive answer on that yet. But we do know it helps people navigate the information environment, gives them more comfortable with what they are seeing. Renee, do you know? Is there an answer to that question?
Well, I know research that I did, right? I think there's a lot of different kinds of research evidence on this topic. When we did the study of student reporting labs, PBS NewsHour student reporting labs, we found that kids who participated in that's a journalism education program, they ended up having more positive attitudes about journalism and a stronger level of trust in news. So, but that was a small study, and it was about, I don't know, 700 kids who participated in that program. So, and that was a pretty intensive journalism education program too, right? That students were actually interacting with professional PBS local journalists, right? So they were making school news and they were interacting with professional journalists. So that program increased people's trust in news, but I don't know about other programs.
And what you're saying is reminding me of what's on our survey. Bias, boring, and bad did look at this, and I know there was some correlations about trust in news. And let me just see if I can find it. Bias, boring, and bad. And my mouse died in the middle of this, so now I have to like use my little pad that is really hard. All right.
No worries, no worries. We can go on to the next question, which I really want to get everybody in the room to weigh in on, because this drives me crazy. And I feel like as a teacher educator, I struggle with this one. Teacher motivations to teach news literacy varies. So what are the different approaches that are used with news literacy based on the teacher's motivations or attitudes or beliefs? Right? Because my guess is, Darren, even at your school, you do it a certain way, and you have colleagues who do it differently.
That's certainly true. I think part of it is that maybe background, I suppose. I have a journalism minor. I was an English major and a journalism minor, and then some of my grad credits then are more in the media literacy areas.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always asking myself, um, what do all these labels mean? Am I teaching media literacy, digital literacy, news literacy, regular literacy? Right now we're redoing curriculum. I'm not involved in the 10th grade redo of the curriculum, but my wife is. And so, there's a desire to bring in nonfiction, but I've discovered that even our perceptions of like what we should be bringing in and watching, Barry.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Today we were discussing discourse questions, so bringing some Renee Hobbs-like questions in to a documentary and things like
Cool.
that. And
Well,
so,
that's actually a really interesting, and it links to that last question, Pamela, which is what are the instructional practices? You said dialogue and discussion, and then you showed us some cool digital interactive things too. So can you talk a little bit about the instructional practices and what they are for news literacy?
Yeah, there's two main ways that educators are teaching about news literacy, and Darren, you hit on one of them, right? Is that the most obvious is there's a class or a journalism class devoted to news and media literacy. And that if you have that as an elective or as some schools will do it as a library science curriculum, that's wonderful. And we've got that framework for teaching news literacy. There are your essential questions. And we've got all those resources for you, just plot it out. Majority of teachers we find are not that journalism instructor, and they're not teaching the elective. And those would require some deep background knowledge. And so the teachers we are working with that aren't in those situations are going to be embedding news literacy into their curriculums. As a former educator, I'm well aware of the demands on a teacher's time and the curriculum you have to get in. Quick story is when I was teaching fourth grade, it was a pandemic, so it was 2020, 2021. It was the 2020-2021 school year. Um, and because it was the pandemic, it was virtual, and the kids had an outdated science textbook. And we were just reading about some crabs that were scuttling across an island, and they were these red crabs. And one of my students piped up, "Oh, they eat their babies." And the entire class was like, "What, what?" Right? Like, there goes the lesson. So I said, "Well, where did you hear that?" And it got into an impromptu teachable moment about news literacy. And so it sparked a lot of interest. And that's where it generated the interest in terms of what do we have to believe? How do we find this out? At the time, I didn't have all the knowledge and skills I had now, so I was kind of learning with them. And so we started looking, okay, well, how do I know I can trust this source? It was just online. It was a social media. This kid was like, I loved him, but he was kicked off TikTok, I think twice while we were there. Like, he was not supposed to be on TikTok, but anyhow, that's where he was finding this information. And we spent the break. I said, okay, it was almost time for break anyway, after the, deplaning of the lesson. And I said, why don't we spend our lunch, eating, and whoever wants to start seeing what you can find out about these crabs. And so a bunch of us did. And I, of course, spent my lunch hour looking for fact checks and found one. We came back and I said, all right, what'd you find? And someone said, oh, I found another video basically corroborating what this other kid said. And somebody else said, well, I'm still not sure. And I was like, okay, well, I found a fact check. And here's what's going on here and why. What should we trust, and how do we know what are some good sites and sources? And it ended up going into a mini unit for about 4 days, which was awesome for me and my students. But then I had to catch up with the other fourth grade teachers. So not so great, right? Like, I was like, okay, let's hurry up. Which means we would want to be, when we can, obviously use those teachable moments, but be thoughtful about where it fits already into the curriculum. So that was one of the impetus, right? So we have our rumor guard every week that has different topics, and it might talk about bears or bunnies on trampolines, or it might talk about politics. So if there's someone that fits with what you are already discussing, we embed that in the curriculum. Right. Same thing, those grade band expectations, find out which will already fit with what you are doing, make that connection explicit so that the learning transfers. We know as educators, we might teach them one thing in ELA, but they go and try to use that skill in social studies. If you don't tell them it works, they may not always do it, right? So we need to make that learning connect.
It's a fascinating thing, and notice Claude's a thoughtful comment, navigating polarized curriculum development. So this idea that, and first of all, I love the story about the teachable moment. And I also feel like I appreciate the sort of tensions around it. Takes a certain confidence. You have to be a little bit ballsy. And these days, students are more unpredictable than they used to be. So,
Yeah.
so there are some risks to that teachable moment, but there's also joys to it. And you just described them so beautifully. I feel like I've been hesitant. During this, I have a spring break coming up. I'm teaching college students too, so that's quite different. But we're gonna do the war. We're gonna spend a week looking at news about the war, right? Because that gets us an opportunity to talk about interests around how expertise is constructed, who's an expert, and also about hidden ideologies, which seems like it's a fact, but actually it comes from a defense contractor. Right? So there'll be it'll be a hot mess. But I feel like, okay, they're living through the war news, whether they like it or not, they're seeing it. So we might as well unpack it a little bit. Do you think the war can be taught do you think war news can be taught about using the NLP resources, Pamela? Or what are the issues, given that you explicitly talked about the whole nonpartisan framing of the organization? Can you teach about war news?
Yeah, you absolutely can. But you brought up a point about, who you are as an educator. So we always say, your class, your district, you choose the resources and the options that you think will best serve your needs. So when we talk about, all of our resources are nonpartisan, and if we do create an example, so our rumor guard is every week, 2 to 3 rumors, and often they are political. But if we have an example that is targeted to the right, we will have an example that is targeted to the left. So when you are presenting, concepts that might be polarizing, make sure you are balancing them, or choose one that is more neutral. Like if you're talking about I get this, I hear this all the time. You don't start with the most controversial topics, because you might run up against a wall. Students will get their defenses, parents will get their defenses up. You start with the non-controversial. So it might just be misinformation in general. And we talk about AI generated videos of bunnies jumping on trampoline, and how do we know that this is false and fake, and what are the repercussions? We talk about clickbait, why people might create this account, and what else is this source showing on their feed, right? And we talk about that. So motivations, why people might share misinformation. And then we would talk about credibility. So research projects, I always get asked about, right? So high school English teachers want to know how they can help their students find credible sources for their research topics. And that does require, some explicit teaching in navigating credibility and sources, and teaching them about characteristics of credibility, which do transfer, whether you're talking about a standards-based news organization or a blogger, or those same standards transfer.
Such a great thing. Hey, listen, Pamela, do me a favor. In the chat, put the link that you want to leave with, and I'll make sure that gets put into the YouTube live stream that's happening now. I'll send out a note about, in case you have a friend who missed this, you want to call their attention to it and say, come in and listen to this afterwards. Thank you so much for introducing us to the program, to the whole topic, the timeliness of it now, and thinking of it in a K-12 way, from the littlest, youngest learners to those brilliant kids at Ames High School, and everywhere in between. So thank you so much for being part of this. And I did want to do just a little shout out. Here's the link to the Media Education Lab events page. Next Wednesday, we have a really cool event leading from the library about teaching about AI. So join us for that. And thanks again. All right, we'll say goodbye. Thank you so much for sharing that resource document, Pamela. I'll be sure to get that up on the YouTube so we can share it with everybody.
Thank
All right,
you.
bye. Darren, great to see you again, my friend. Thanks for being part of it. You rock.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Claude, right with you. Thanks again, guys. Bye-bye.